Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to review the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro Controller. I picked this up when I got the Switch 2 last week, and I was really surprised at the price point. This is now $85 retail. So I've got a couple questions about this as I'm going into it. Number one is going to be, what is the connection like? What new features do we have? I know this has what they're calling HD Rumble 2, so I want to test that out. And then also I want to see just how it compares to the original Switch 1 Pro Controller, and then whether or not it works on anything but the Nintendo Switch 2. So we're going to do all that testing and have a little bit of fun along the way. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, two new features with this new one is that it has programmable back buttons and then also has a different battery size. So this one is 1070 milliamp hours. I've also got my old Switch 1 Pro controller. This is a Tomtoc hard shell case right here. And this one has a larger battery. This one is 1400 milliamp hours. And so it's surprising that they actually went with a smaller battery this time around. Now inside the box, there's not a lot going on. We really just have the controller and then a cable. That's it. And it is a Nintendo branded USB-A to USB-C cable. Now I know I'm unboxing the controller right now, but I have been messing around with it for a little bit. But my first impression with it is that I really like the texture of the plastic. So it has a kind of smooth and almost soft plastic feel to it. It also feels pretty fingerprint resistant, like it's not getting very smudgy after, a few hours of use. So I'm happy with that. The old one is definitely very different looking. It has a transparent black plastic here, which is kind of just like a hard, more slick plastic. And then it had like these comfort grips here that were a softer rubber with these little dots on them. I was not a huge fan of the grips on this one just because it looked a little bit different, the texture was weird, and it felt almost kind of leathery, and so I didn't really like this just because it felt a little bit sticky over time. I had to clean this controller a lot. This one has kind of a similar design in that you can see like the line going around here separating the grip from the controller itself, but the material is the same, so it actually feels very smooth and nice. We've also got this light gray color here on the top. I actually like this as well. My second big impression about this is that the analog sticks are actually different from one another. Now, I think that on the Pro Controller, this one is a little bit shorter than the left one, but just a hair difference. Like I can barely feel the difference between the two. But with the Switch 2, it is immediately apparent that this left stick is taller than the one on the right. And if you look at it at a side profile, you can see that the caps are different as well. This one is a thinner cap compared to the thicker cap on the left side. And so, yes, not only is the stick taller, but the cap seems to be different as well. I'm not sure what's going on in making that design decision. Maybe it's that they didn't want to have any conflict between the right analog stick and the face buttons, which I don't really think is there anyway because of the shape of the controller. And yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on. It's a little bit weird too because in a lot of like Pro controllers, it's the right analog stick that's taller because a lot of people use this for like FPS games. I think because, competitive first-person shooters are not something that is probably the primary focus of a Switch 2 controller. That's probably why they didn't go with a tall right analog stick, just because it's not going to be that big of a deal. But yes, this is a very left stick focused controller. And I don't know, I think it feels kind of neat. I'm not really sure just why they went that route. Let's actually talk about controls now, and we'll talk about the analog sticks first. So these have a light gray coloring to them here underneath the stick, much like we have on the top. So I like the fact that it's unified like that. It seems to be the same color gray as we have on the face buttons too. So again, a very unified presentation. The sticks themselves feel surprisingly smooth. Even when I'm like grinding them against the sides, it feels really good. Often with more modern controllers, you will find like a metal rim around here on the stick, but we're not seeing that. It's just plastic on plastic, but it still feels very smooth. I like the action here. As far as resistance of the sticks, I would say that it's a little bit stronger than on the Switch 1 Pro controller. It really wants to snap back to the center. And so I actually like this feeling. It feels like you've got to be pretty deliberate in moving it around, but once you do move it around, it's a very smooth experience. The Switch 1 Pro controller is a little bit looser in its feeling. It still snaps back to center, but not as deliberately so. Another thing I noticed is that the sticks themselves are actually thinner in diameter on the Switch 2 Pro controller, and so it does give you a pretty good range of motion, and yeah, that might be contributing to the overall smooth feeling as well. The Switch Pro controller is more designed like an Xbox controller. You can see it's a pretty fat stick right there, and it is definitely just immediately hitting the sides and then kind of grinding around, and this one definitely doesn't feel as smooth. As far as the caps, they look pretty identical, so they have like a little light ribbing around the edges of them, so they're not like dotted or anything like you would find on an Xbox controller, and so they're more circular in that kind of cap design, and they also are somewhat flat here in the top. Now, something that always bothered me about the Switch 1 Pro controller was the feel of the caps, because they would kind of get sticky, like the plastic would break down on its own, and so I would often have to clean these with alcohol wipes. And this kind of texture, like that stickiness, seems like it's coming over here on the Switch 2 controller as well. It's not actually sticky or anything, but I can just feel it's a very similar texture, and so I feel like this is something that will get sticky over time. Now, this is not a new thing. It happens all the time on my DualSense controllers. It's really annoying. I've actually bought multiple ones because even after cleaning, they're still a little bit sticky, and that drives me nuts. I can feel like this is going to get sticky over time as well, which is kind of unfortunate. So putting it all together, I'm a little bit surprised that we have so many changes with these sticks. You know, the diameter of the sticks themselves is a little bit thinner. We have like these different sizes in terms of length here at the top. And then also it just feels a lot smoother and a little bit more resistant. It actually feels a little bit more pro in that regard, and so it's kind of keeping its namesake. Let's talk about the D-pad next. So this is a rubber membrane D-pad, much like you would find on a Nintendo or Super Nintendo, but of course a little bit more modern looking. As far as travel distance, I think it's good. It actually moves down quite a bit when you press down, but it doesn't like bottom out by pressing against the shell. And so it feels very distinct as you're moving it, and it also has a pretty good pivot to it as well. So I can feel it going in all the different directions. The touch on this is also relatively light, like I can easily press in all directions, and it feels a little bit looser than it did on the Switch 1 Pro controller. Now, this one I've had for like, I don't know, 7 years or whatever, and you would think it would get a lot looser over time, but it's not. It's still a pretty tight D-pad. Now, it's not a bad D-pad either. I've always thought that the D-pad on this is good, but this one feels just a little bit more like loose and friendly out of the box. Okay, so I just bought the Contra Anniversary Collection so I could test the D-pad on this controller. This is like $8 on sale right now, so not a big deal, and it's got actually a lot of options here. But so what I like to do with the Contra test is I like to use the NES version of the game, and then I press down on the D-pad and then rock it left and right to see whether or not the character moves. So this in general will give me a fair understanding of whether or not the D-pad has accidental diagonals. By that I mean that if I press down and then maybe I don't hit it down perfectly, will I actually hit down and left or down and right on accident instead? And the way you test that is by pressing down on the D-pad, which makes the character crouch, and then you rock it left and right to see whether or not the character moves. And this character instantly moves, as you can see here, which to me fails the Contra test. This is a little bit too sensitive. In this game in particular, if you're like running around and a bullet is coming at you, and what you want to do is you want to duck, like it's really important that you duck at that time, because if you duck and you hit to the side on accident, you'll just move like that instead. And so you'll just run into the button. That's not a good feeling. And so with these types of precision platformers, you want to be able to press down, and then it won't move the character when you rock it left and right unless you really push it to one side or the other. So for me, this is too sensitive. I would say it's maybe like 20% more sensitive than I would like. Now, the nice thing is that I can feel kind of like a resistant click as I'm doing it. So it's kind of like a confirmation as I'm moving it left and right. And so it kind of stays in its own lane in that you know exactly when you don't go straight up and down. But to me, it's still a little bit too sensitive. I would have liked this to be just a little bit more resistant. Now, whether or not this is a deal breaker for you when playing a game like Contra is kind of subjective. And so I don't want to say this is a bad D-pad or anything, but for me, it's too sensitive. I would have a hard time playing this game and not accidentally running into a bullet. So for me, I would rather use a different D-pad than this one. Now, another good precision platformer test with a D-pad is Celeste. So it's actually this stage in particular. What I like to do here is kind of jump up around, and then when I get to this part, I like to go left or right here and make sure it goes straight on. And then same thing when I get to this part, I want to jump straight up. And so I'm trying to avoid diagonals right here, but then hit them in all the other points. And I found that when testing this, it is a little bit too sensitive. Now, it's not every single time, but I would say maybe 20% of the time I am hitting a diagonal when I don't want to in this game, which means that other similar games like this, you know, Celeste and Super Meat Boy and whatnot, this is probably going to be a little bit too sensitive if you are a D-pad-centric player and you're a little bit sensitive to it. So overall, I would say that, yeah, it's a bit of a touchy D-pad. Now, I also just bought the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, which is, I think, $10 on sale right now. And this one has Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which is the other game that I like to test with the D-pad. Now, in this game, I'm testing the opposite to see how easy it is to hit a diagonal when I want to. And yeah, I think it's working pretty well. It took me a moment to acclimate, but after that, yeah, I'm hitting all my Hadoukens and Shoryukens, which all require diagonal input. So I think with a Street Fighter style game, this will be a pretty good D-pad. So long story short, it's a bit of a touchy D-pad, so certain games are probably not going to be the best on this, but for everything else, it should be pretty good. Okay, now let's talk about these face buttons. So these are also rubber membrane like the D-pad, and they have, a fair amount of travel to them as well. These buttons are pretty big. Like in a lot of other controllers, you find something that's a little bit smaller in diameter, especially when it comes to like retro handhelds, like the stuff that I cover on this channel. So these do feel kind of overly large, but I like that. The buttons on the Switch 1 Pro controller are about 10.6 millimeters, but on the Switch 2 Pro controller, they're about 11.25. So they are bigger than they are on the Switch 1 Pro. As far as the feel, they also are pretty good. They don't take a lot of force to press down on, and probably one of my favorite things about them is that they are quiet. Like I can barely hear them when pressing down. So they're not going to be like big and clacky like a lot of other console controllers. In fact, the Switch 1 Pro controller is quite a bit louder. Now, it's hard to make a direct comparison between the two just because this is like a 7-year-old controller, so it's had a lot of wear and tear on it, but still, this one's a little bit like loud and clacky, and the buttons are a little bit looser in the shell, like they have more travel or play to them compared to this one, which is a little bit tighter and quieter. So yeah, I think these face buttons are good. They're nice and big, not too hard to press down on, and they are not loud. Also up top, we've got our select and start buttons. These are also rubber membrane and relatively quiet. Then we've got a screen capture button and then also our home button. And then down here on the bottom, we've got our game chat button, which is a new button for the Switch 2. Up top, we have our Bluetooth connection button. You can see that I am connected wirelessly to my Switch 2, our USB-C charging port, which can also be used to play in wired mode. And then this looks to be a charging indicator LED. Now let's talk about these shoulders and triggers, and I think these are really good. Now these bumpers right here, they're nice. Like you do not have to press down on them very hard at all, and they feel great, and they are super silent as well. And so these might be some of my favorite bumpers just because, man, I can press on them so fast, they don't take a lot of resistance, and they're just so quiet. I love that. Now the triggers are great. You can easily slide back to hit them, and there's a bit of like a dip right here, so you know when you're on one or the other. And then also it's just a really nice form fit for my index finger. So I think it feels really good. My only complaint here is just kind of the same with any Switch product in that it is a digital input. So we don't have a full analog input here. And I think that would be great if this worked as like a PC controller and you had an analog input. You could then use this like when playing Steam games or something. I think that would be awesome. But this is going to really limit the games that you can play on it just because of the digital input. Now, the Switch and the Switch 2 have a digital input with the triggers, so it's going to work with the system it's designed to work with. But it just kind of removes some of its functionality. And even though this controller is not made with an analog input in mind, the Switch 2 has support for Nintendo GameCube games, which did have an analog input. And so it would be nice if maybe there was like a toggle switch here for like digital and analog input, so you could just physically switch it over between the other two. And so you could play Nintendo GameCubes with this controller with a bit more of a true input. But again, in terms of its purpose of just being like a pro version of the Switch controller, I can understand why they went digital, but I just think it limits them a little bit too much. Now on the back, this is also new. We've got programmable buttons, so GL and GR. So you can assign these to other buttons, so that way, for example, if you're playing something you don't want to have to move off the right analog stick to press a face button, you can use one of these on the back instead. For example, when playing like a first-person shooter game where you want to kind of have your thumbs on the sticks at all times, then what I generally would do is I will assign this one to be my jump button and this one my reload button, which are usually right here on the controller. And so instead of having to take my finger off to press those, I can just kind of keep it like this and play as I need to. Now let's assign some of these back buttons. We'll use a first-person shooter game, Metroid Prime Remastered. So the idea here is you just press and hold the home button. It's going to bring up the side menu, and then you can assign the buttons down here on the bottom. So for example, with GL, it says, all right, what do you want to assign to this? That's going to be this button on the side. I'm going to make it this Y button, which is the morph ball button. And then for GR, same thing here. This is going to be on this side. I'm going to make it the jump button, which is B. And that's it. You've now assigned them, and it's going to save it on a per game profile as well as to your own player profile as well. And so the next time that I specifically boot up this game with my profile as player 1, it's going to show this as my like button mapping. And so now as I'm playing here, you can see that I press the one on the right and makes me jump. And then if I press the one on the left, it can make me turn into the morph ball. And so I've kind of got like all the controls that I would need with this game. There's no reloading in this game, so it's a pretty simple function like that. And so you've got a lot of options with what you can do with these back buttons. It's really up to you, but for me with first-person games, that's usually how I set it up. And so, I don't know, let me know what other games you use back buttons with in the comments. I'm kind of curious to see how I could use this a little bit better. Okay, so that's it when it comes to controls. I think it's a very comfortable controller. It obviously has that Xbox-style layout with the left analog stick up top, but I think it feels really good. All the buttons are easy to access, and it feels very comfortable. I like the texture of the plastic here and just the overall feel of it. It feels, kind of flat here on the center like the original Switch 1 Pro controller did, but I don't know, it's something that I don't think is a bad thing. It's still very comfortable. I like the way that the grips here are angled out to the sides. They flare out, which means that you're not going to have any problems with like your elbows in particular. Like with some other controllers, they're a little bit too narrow and that can hurt over time. This, I think, is angled correctly. I also think the diameter of the grips is actually pretty good as well. It's not as beefy as something like an Xbox controller, but still very good. So I find this to be a very comfortable controller, something that I could play for hours on end. One other thing I forgot to mention, on the bottom we've got a headphone jack, so you can get an audio output here if you want to play quietly. Say, for example, you don't want to wake up the whole house while you're playing in the middle of the night. You could just hear it through here. Okay, let's talk about the rumble function here. So it's HD Rumble 2. And the thing that I've noticed about this in particular, and Celeste is a great example, is that there are different levels of rumble, and it does feel like it just kind of shifts around within the controller just a little bit. I'm not sure if that's all happening in my head, but for example here, if I do the dash button, which is going to make like the character just like jump up like that, I get a little bit of a like jolt, where it's like boom, and it just kind of moves up a little bit. Now, if I actually make the character grab onto the side of something like this, and then I move up and down, I can actually feel a little bit of movement left and right as the character is moving. So it's almost like they're climbing up, and you can feel them climbing on your controller. I feel it a little bit on the left, I feel it a little bit on the right, and so it's just kind of a really neat experience. Even when my character lands on the ground, there's a little bit of a rumble that happens near like kind of the bottom of the controller. Again, I might be making it up in terms of the actual location of the rumble, but that's what it feels like to me, so it feels great. Even when I grab onto the side of the controller like this, I feel almost like a heartbeat happening, and then it speeds up when you get to the end right here. And it's kind of crazy. It's like Madeline's heartbeat as you're moving. Now, all this stuff is programmed in the game, so I'm not saying this is anything special, but it is pretty cool that it's happening here on the controller. One thing of note, this controller also does have an accelerometer as well as gyroscope. So you can see here, I am able to move this around and, kind of aim my bows and arrows. It feels pretty good. And so no issues here when it comes to this. I generally don't play games with this, but if this is something you liked in the original Switch 1, it seems to be working here as well. Now, one thing worth noting, I have heard this controller will wake the Switch up from sleep when in docked mode. I don't have the dock on me. It's actually at home right now, and so I forgot to bring it over. But one thing I did want to mention is that you cannot actually wake the device from sleep in Bluetooth mode. And so you can see here it's trying to pair, nothing's happening, but if I go and I tap on it here in handheld mode, it will work and I will be able to connect. It'll take a moment, but there you go. And so now I'm able to jump into my game. But something worth noting is that it will not wake the console from sleep, at least in handheld mode. Now I want to test to see what the Switch 2 is going to work with out of the box with other consoles and operating systems. I don't have a lot of high hopes here, but I'd rather just be thorough and see what works and what doesn't. Now with the Switch 1, I'm actually not able to connect it wirelessly. I'm not sure if it's because it was previously connected to Switch 2 and so now it's trying to find that, but I can press and hold this and I'm not sure if it's going to reset it or what, but I'm not able to actually connect it wirelessly. Even when using a USB-C to USB-C cable here, it does charge it from the Nintendo Switch, which is interesting, but no, it doesn't actually connect. So I'm not really sure what's going on here, why it's not connecting to the Switch 1. So yeah, as far as I can tell, you cannot use the Switch 2 Pro controller with the Switch 1. If I do figure out how to get this working or if there's any sort of software update, I'll be sure to leave a pinned comment. But as it stands right now, yeah, I wasn't able to get this working. Okay, now let's do a Windows Bluetooth connection to see if this will work. So let's do Bluetooth, turn this on, and get the pairing going. And unfortunately, I don't see it showing up here. I've tried a couple different times and it's not working. So whatever Bluetooth connectivity option they're using here with the Switch 2 Pro controller, it's not compatible with Windows, at least out of the gate. So I'm not really sure what's going on here, but yeah, again, it's not connecting. Okay, so next I'm going to try it wired to see if it'll work here in Windows. And this charges it, I can see that, and it also made a little ring. So yeah, but still not getting any input here. Even when plugging it into a Windows PC, it is not actually working. You can see it's trying to connect, but the wired connection is not being picked up either here in Windows. It might get improved in terms of compatibility in the future, but as it stands right now, this is kind of disappointing. I thought it would at least work in Windows. I'm also a glutton for punishment, so I wanted to see if it worked on SteamOS with the Steam Deck, and same thing here, searching for devices, have it in pairing mode, it's not getting picked up here either. And so, no, this is not going to work on the Steam Deck either. And then one more shot here, trying to see if it works with Android, and unfortunately, no, I don't see it showing up here either. And so, yeah, this thing will only work on a Nintendo Switch 2, apparently. Okay, one other note, I've been testing this for, I don't know, a few days at this point, but not enough to really say what the battery life is going to be on it. It is rated for 40 hours of battery life, and it should take 2.5 hours to charge. And that seems to line up with what I've been doing. I've only charged it just to see how it looks when it charges, but I have not actually needed to charge it just yet. I have not played over 40 hours with my Switch 2 yet, with this controller specifically. But something to bear in mind is that Nintendo has always been pretty good about saying how long the battery life is going to be. And so the previous model, which did have a larger battery, also gave about 40 hours of battery life, and that was about on par with my expectations as well. So I think this will probably give you 40 hours of battery life. Okay, so wrapping up here, let's talk about what I like and what I don't like about the Switch 2 controller, and then finally discuss whether or not I think it's actually worth it. Now, in terms of what I like, there's a few things here that I think are pretty awesome. Number one is that just the overall materials of it feel really good, and the design is also really nice. And like with the Switch 1 Pro controller, it's a comfortable controller. Like, the grips are a really nice size and they're at a good angle. I can play this thing for hours on end. I also like the feel of these sticks. They are better than on the original Pro controller. They've got a little bit more resistance to them. And then also they just have like a nice smooth gliding quality to them. So I've really enjoyed using these sticks so far. I also appreciate that it's a quiet controller. Even when mashing on the face buttons, it's quieter than you would expect, and a lot quieter than, say, something from Xbox or PlayStation. The face buttons are a little bit bigger too, which makes them very comfortable. And then finally, I was surprised to find that I liked this HD rumble. I'm going to have to use it more with other games to really kind of extract the overall feeling of it, but just in playing some of my favorite games, I could feel the difference between like a really hardcore rumble and then something a lot lighter, and it felt almost like geographic in its rumble, which was pretty cool. Now, it's definitely not a perfect controller. Number one is the fact that I think the D-pad is too touchy. It kind of failed the Contra test, and also it was a little bit rough when playing Celeste. I'd say it's about 20% more sensitive than I would like. I'm also a little bit worried about the lifespan of these analog sticks. These are not like Hall sensors or TMR sticks, those new technologies that will allow them to avoid stick drift. And so we may have stick drift problems with these sticks in the future. I'm not really sure. So it's not something I can really comment on other than the fact that I wish they had used a better technology. I was also disappointed to see how low the compatibility is. It only works with the Switch 2, not even the Switch 1 or Windows or Android or even SteamOS. And so I'm hoping that, at some point we may get better compatibility, because this is a controller I would like to use with other systems. And the low compatibility also really goes towards the fact that $85 for a controller that only works on the Switch 2 is kind of a hard sell. I've got a variety of controllers from companies like GameSir and 8BitDo, and all of these work with the Nintendo Switch. Some of these 8BitDo ones needed a firmware update that just recently came out, but after that, yes, all these can connect to the Nintendo Switch. The button layout is correct for them and everything. But these will also work on a PC and SteamOS as well as Android, and that is crazy considering the fact that these are all a lot cheaper than $85, and like these two come with their own charging dock as well. And so it's really hard to say that this one Switch 2 Pro controller is better than all these things, which can connect to so much more and are cheaper. Yes, this is a great feeling controller. If you're only going to be playing Switch 2 games and you want something that just works and is very comfortable, then yes, I could see this happening. But if you're like me and you're watching these videos, you like to play your video games on multiple platforms, then I just see these as being a much bigger value. And so the conclusion of this video is a pretty typical stance for my channel, in that yes, the Switch 2 Pro controller is a very good controller. Like, if I'm going to be playing a game on my Switch 2 and I'm going to be playing on my big screen TV, like this is probably the controller I would want to use the most. But it's also $85, and I've got other things that I can buy with that money that might serve me better just all around. And so yes, the Switch 2 Pro controller is a good controller. Do I recommend it? It really depends. Like, are you only going to be playing it with your Switch 2? And is that, budget, like, is it within your budget? Then okay, sure. But for me personally, I would much rather recommend something like a GameSir controller, which will work on a bunch of other things. This has just got a lot more value to it. So here's the way I see it. If the Switch 2 Pro controller had a little bit less of a sensitive D-pad, it had the ability to swap out with analog and digital inputs here on the back, and also was compatible with a bunch of other systems, then yes, I could recommend this easily, even for $85. But in the meantime, I think that, being able to buy any of these other options, and some of these, you could probably buy like both of these together for $85 or less, like that just makes it a better value. So I would say in general, these are better controllers. I'll leave them all linked down below if you've never seen anything about them. But if you are looking for just Switch 2, then yes, this might be an okay purchase, but not one that I can easily recommend. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.